What's up, Internet? You're tuned into a very special episode of the Steam Deck Podcast, Slipstream Games' weekly gaming podcast, all about Valve's portable PC powerhouse, the Steam Deck. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined as always by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Max Wright.
Ahoy, ahoy.
And joining us today, a very special guest, Abubakar Salim of Surgeon Studios.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello,
Hello,
Abu. Welcome to the
hello.
show.
Thank you. This is great.
We've been so excited to have you on. We've spent a few weeks sort of like scrabbling around to get things sorted, and we're glad it's finally happening. Very excited.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're
moving, man,
really
it's
excited to
moving.
talk to you, man. Thank you
it's
so much for
good.
making the time to come on the show.
No, of course.
Totally.
Thank you guys for having me. Like, it's honestly, I enjoy talking about the game and just about the journey of it all. So yeah, please, thank you.
So for those who don't know, right, Abu and the team at Surgeon have been working on a game called Tales of Kenzera, which we talked about. It's an upcoming Metroidvania game, which we've talked about a couple times on the show. Max and I both played it at Steam Next Fest, and we gave our impressions of the demo back then. And it's a game that we've both had our eye on for a while and have been excited to chat about. So if folks aren't familiar with the game, Abu, could you just give them like a quick elevator pitch?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Tales of Kenzera follows the journey of a young shaman kid named Zhao, who essentially makes a deal with the god of death, Kalunga, that in exchange for 3 great spirits, he will bring his father's, spirit back to the land of the living. And it's essentially, it's a 2.5D side scroller, sort of Metroidvania, sort of adventure sort of game, and it's it really kind of pulling from a lot of the inspirations that I played as a kid with my dad, and also just the new games as well that I've kind of discovered on my own and sort of played with that. And it's pulling also from African mythology and Bantu myths and legends, and again just the stories that I was very much exposed to when I was younger. And yeah, it's very much inspired by my own journey of grief, my own sort of my own journey of losing my father, and what that has done to me, and kind of where my head is at from that. And yeah, it's this sort of crazy, sort of fun first venture that I sort of decided to jump into with a completely new team and new studio, not knowing anything about what it means to make a game, and just being like, screw it, I want to do it. And so yeah, and here we are now.
I love that, and I'm so fascinated to talk to you about that journey and some of those influences. But I have to start here. I don't want to bury the lead. This is the Steam Deck podcast, and we're very
Yeah.
excited to find out and be able to announce here that the game is going to be deck verified at
Yes,
launch.
it is. Yes, it
which
is.
We are so excited about here.
Oh man, you know what's funny, right? That's another one of those ones where, like, if it wasn't for putting the demo out, we wouldn't have really thought about it, right? Because again, like, look, we're a new team. Like, we're kind of learning the ropes of what it means to make a game and launch a game, right? And elements, of course, of like performance and whatnot are really kind of crucial for us. That's something that we really want to hit. And what's great is you can prepare as much as you can in your own space, in your own home, but really truly the best test is the people playing. And what we realized and what we saw was a lot of people being like, can't wait to play on this on Steam Deck, can't wait to play with this on Steam Deck. And we were just like, yo, what's the Steam, like, what is the Steam Deck? What's going on? And what's crazy, I was just like, all right, you know what, this is something that I think is really gonna hit well. It's gonna do well. We're doing it for Switch already. We should be able to hit the Steam Deck. I even bought myself a Steam Deck, and I'm in love with it, by the way.
Welcome
It's
to the
like
gang.
now, yo, it is revolutionary. Like, I truly am in love with this console. It's phenomenal. But yeah, so it was just like, I was just like, okay, cool, let's do this. And the team just knuckled down and amazingly and brilliantly, have worked really hard to get us verified, which is something that is, kind of crazy to think, like, oh yeah, that's just another console that we've thrown on top of it. So
out of
yeah,
nowhere.
yeah,
Because we played the game on when we did Steam Next Fest episode, we played the game specifically on the Steam Deck, and we
Right.
did notice that there were some sort of like issues with performance, and if you didn't turn some of the settings right the way down. So considering you are verified, that doesn't necessarily specify any kind of performance. What are we aiming for here on the Steam Deck, especially maybe on the
sort
OLED
of like
model?
the low settings, sort of, on like, say, like the LCD sort of thing, we're looking at 40 FPS kind of thing.
great.
OLED like 45 FPS, but on like the lowest settings, you could hit like 60 FPS on both. It's
Yeah.
like, that's the kind of aim that we're going for. And it's funny because, again, it's that whole thing of like, it was quite last minute and we kind of wanted to really try and capture, the best of what we can.
Mhm.
But in my mind, it's like, all right, cool. You know what? Next time, take it into consideration that this Steam Deck
Sure.
is a thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's dozens of
So,
us, and
yeah.
we're all very happy to buy
I
games,
know,
we love it.
exactly, and that's it. And like even for me, like I always think about like the kind of it's funny, like I was playing it on I was playing the game recently at GDC on the
Mhm,
Switch, and it plays really well and it feels really well. And I was like, man, we should have been focusing on the deck at the same
mhm,
time, because then
mhm,
that long time would have allowed us to kind of really hit it, really hit it well and kind of optimize well. But I think we've done a decent good job of where we are now, for sure, and kind of allowed that sense of still being able to capture the fluidity and fun nature of it all on the deck
mhm.
at the same time, not necessarily hinder on the uh on the look and the vibe of what we wanted to try and capture.
Yeah, we're really excited to play it on deck specifically.
Yeah,
Mm,
absolutely. That's where I'm planning on playing it. And I'm
Mhm,
really excited to hear that we can hit that 45 FPS. That'll be nice.
mm,
I did want
mm.
to pull in a question here from one of our Discord members. This one comes from Team Linux, who wrote in and said, "I'd like to ask if they specifically did any testing via a Steam Deck. Was any code developed directly on a Steam Deck?" So I'm interested in, I guess, that process of like you hear people talking about Deck, you become aware of Steam Deck. Like, how does that start? Then you buy that unit, and is that the unit that you guys were testing on,
No,
or?
so yeah, you kind of work. I think it's a mixture of working with Valve as well as kind of
mhm,
as well as the team themselves. Like I think ultimately you do a lot of like Valve do their own testing a lot of the time to kind of ensure that it's all good and all kosher. So you do a lot of you're working with Valve with their kind of kit to make sure that it works there. You do also get a deck yourself and you're playing it a lot of the time and testing to see, okay, does this build work? Does this build not work? What is happening? What we're catching over here, and looking at dips of like and stutters and everything. So you're kind of doing it's a bit of a mix of both, because from my understanding, and again I'd love to kind of pick the brains of our code team who did the massive job of making this work. But like from my understanding, it was very much like a ragtag sort of like, let's just figure it out and see how this works, right? And kind of do it,
Yeah.
especially with the time frame that we had. But
mhm.
yeah, I think a lot of us have now kind of basically pulled in, got the console, or tried to test it with the console. And EA have been really helpful in that regard as well, in regards to being like, actually we should probably look into this too, and deal with it there. So they've helped a lot on that front too.
That's so great to hear.
Mhm.
Mm.
I guess from the fact that you own a Steam Deck and you're having a great time already, we can expect a second visit from you on the Steam Deck podcast just to talk
Oh,
about the Steam
100%.
Deck, right? There we
I
Absolutely.
go.
just wanna hear what
Brilliant.
you're
Absolutely.
playing. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
honestly,
Yeah,
well,
yeah, yeah.
so at the moment, so I was playing Elden Ring. So this
Great.
was the test for me, right? I
Sure.
was, as I was flying to San Fran, I was like playing Elden Ring to be like, okay, I'm just gonna see if this thing could even handle Elden Ring. And it handled it beautifully. And
Mhm.
I was like,
Uh-huh.
this is insane. Like I'm playing like big console games on handheld, and it just blew my mind. And so yeah, I was playing that. I was playing Sea of Stars as well.
Oh,
And
what a
then
great game.
You're talking
car-
about the range of the Steam Deck there, really, aren't you?
I
You've
mean,
got
Yeah,
honestly,
massive
right?
AAA
Elden
Elden Ring
Ring to like Sea of
RPGs.
Stars, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. And now I'm currently playing Guardians of the Galaxy, which is
great. Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
also
yeah.
really,
nice,
really cool. Yeah. So
nice.
it's honestly, it's so much fun and it's so great because you can just take it anywhere. I know
Mhm,
like this is not like necessarily, old news. We've had the Game Boys and everything and all that. But I think for me it's the fact that I have these incredibly big games that you wouldn't necessarily think would ever be sort of portable. Like
mhm.
again, Elden Ring. Like who would have thought that I could travel with Elden Ring and play it on a plane? Like no one. The fact that I'm able to do this is just astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine you probably travel a lot for work, so I imagine that's,
Yeah.
like, probably a great way for you to
Yeah.
be able to chip away at some of those bigger
It's
titles, like,
yeah,
while you're
man.
on a
It's
plane or whatever, right?
This is the thing. It's my thing. Like normally, I'm always about the Switch, and I'm always taking the Switch everywhere with me. Don't
Mhm.
get me wrong, I still play it, but I think genuinely the biggest winner right now is the deck. It's
I
like
mean,
Yeah.
it is
yeah,
incredible.
you're
It is
preaching to the choir.
incredible. Honestly. And like I was lucky, fortunate enough to sort of get the OLED OLED sort of version. Like rather than, getting it at the beginning with the LCD. And it's just nuts. It's just
Yeah.
really it's blown me away, and I'm so again, wouldn't have even thought about it if we didn't put the demo out and didn't even think about, the idea of it all. So I'm just really happy that, we've got it through the door.
Yeah,
So,
Wiki, yeah,
listeners out there, you're welcome. You know, we made it happen. The Steam Deck players. So, as much as I would love to continue talking about your time with the Steam Deck, well, I will have to have you back on for that because I want to talk about the game. Uh,
Yes, absolutely.
I was like very, very moved by your speech at the Game Awards where you revealed the game, and you know, kind of the way that you spoke about this game as, you know, a means of exploring grief and
Yeah.
as something that felt true to both you and your father, because like gaming was something that you shared together, and you
Hmm.
mentioned specifically that he kind of started your love of video games because he appreciated them as an art form and like
Yeah.
as a means of escapism. And I'd love for you to talk to me about that. Like what was that like? Was that a thing that you and your dad were often playing games together? Was that something
Yeah.
where you
So
watched him play games or something like
no,
that?
so my dad was a software engineer. He worked at
Mm,
Xerox at the time. And so he kind of had this sort of natural affinity or love for tech, for technology, for the evolving sort of nature of it all, coding and all that kind of jazz. And I think he saw essentially in me that I wasn't necessarily connecting with a lot of the TV that I'd be watching, but unless it's like a cartoon, right? Or like, the books I struggled reading because I'm dyslexic. So it was, it take me a lot longer to sort of, take in this information. Um, but he saw that, when it came to games and when it came to actually actively partaking in these stories, that it connected with me, and it really kind of was a way for me. So I remember, our early sort of playings were like Sonic the Hedgehog, or even Mario and that kind of jazz, on the Mega Drives, and it was more so him watching me play and him
mhm.
enjoying me play rather than necessarily him partaking in it as well. I mean, like every now and then he'd jump into it, but it was more of a sense of seeing his son have enjoyment out of
Yeah.
enjoying something. And I think that was and he was the kind of guy as well where I remember even my mum being like, if you studied as much as you played games, you'd be somewhere else. And my dad was always that mentality of like, actually, you don't know where this could go. Like, just let him explore. And,
Mhm.
you know, because of that openness, I played everything, man. I played and collected everything. Games were again like a form of like reading a book or like
Yeah.
watching TV for me when I was growing up. So the reason why I'm so knowledgeable in it, or why I enjoy it so much, is because I was able to have that enjoyment without feeling judged, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
And I think like
absolutely.
that's really where that love came from and where that passion came from.
It's
That's
nice to
beautiful.
see, like, fathers introducing, their people of our age who grew up with video games, maybe their fathers did or didn't introduce
Yeah.
them to them. Nowadays, there are kids that are growing up and their dad's like, "Look, you need to be playing this. This is from my childhood,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah." And I
Yeah.
was very much like, there were games that I would play with my brother. I'm a twin. My dad would sit us down and go, "Here's Sonic the Hedgehog," much the same as you. And
Yeah.
then it'd be like, "Right, now it's my turn. I'm gonna play Final Fantasy VII on the PS1," and we just sit
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
watch. So there was like an element of watching, an element of playing, and it was sort of nice. So I've always felt that growing up as well, like
Yeah.
It's
not that I
it
was told, "Stop doing that."
Yeah, it's funny because I can relate to your experience there, Abu, where like my father didn't grow up with games, but when I took an interest in them, he took an interest in anything I took an interest in, right? So
Right.
like I have vivid memories of when I was very young and him having moments where he was better than me, and then I quickly eclipsed him.
Yeah.
And to this day,
Yeah.
he'll like tell the story of how like we'd be playing like Crash Team Racing on the PlayStation, and I'm like turning my head to talk to him, and he's like putting 100% of his focus into trying to beat me and just getting his ass handed to him, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Of
I
course.
remember
Of
the
course.
first time because my dad used to come into our room and go, "Right, get my brother, play me at FIFA." And my dad would whip him every single time, whip him at FIFA. The
Right.
first time my brother beat him at FIFA, I remember him just being like, "All right, cool," and just left the room. Like he didn't want to know anymore.
Didn't
Lost
want to know
Or
completely
anymore.
just
lost him.
been
No.
passed.
I
Yeah.
think for me, it was Tekken. I remember
Oh
playing
yeah.
Tekken with my dad, and that was one of those ones where I he started getting really pissed at the idea of being beaten by his son. And like, and that's the thing. I grew up on Tekken and like fighting games and even like Dragon Ball Z and all that jazz. So like
Sure.
it was really one of those moments where it's funny how the switch happens where they're like, yeah, I'll introduce my son to this, this
Yeah.
thing, and then suddenly you start like overcoming the master. They're like, all right, I don't want
Exactly.
anything to do with this
But
now.
what a
You do
proud
your
moment,
thing.
right?
I
I
probably
know,
had a
right?
couple more
It's
years though, I
yeah,
think is
I
probably
know.
right. It's like
Yeah,
Yeah.
for
an
sure.
8-year-old is just cleaning my clock now, you know?
Oh man,
Yeah.
honestly, man. Oh,
Well,
So
I was sort of interested in, as well as the games that you played growing up that
mm.
sort of you played with your father. What games sort of have inspired you to play this? Because I know this is a Metroidvania game. When this was first
Mm.
announced at the Game Awards, wasn't very well. I was sitting downstairs quietly while my girlfriend was asleep watching the Game Awards, and I sat bolt upright and I was like, "This game has my attention." Right?
Right.
I'm a big Metroidvania guy. I've played Metroid Fusion on the Game Boy Advance for the first time in like 2004. It's changed me forever. Everything I sort of play now, I'm like, is this like Metroid? Is this like Castlevania? I'm sort of looking for it, right?
Yeah.
So I want to know, when you were sort of putting this game together and creating this game, was it always envisioned as Metroidvania, or did you sort of like try out a few genres or a few ideas before you landed on that as the genre?
That's a really good question, man. So so the way the kind of the process of building this game always started with story, right?
Mhm,
I knew that I wanted to kind of share this experience of grief or this journey of grief, and trying to figure out what that genre is. It there was a lot playing in my mind, like, where could it fit? Where could it fit? Where could it fit? And actually, funnily enough, it sort of, as I was paper prototyping it and playing it in my head, it naturally fell into the Metroidvania sort of genre space. Because again, and I've said this before, like, for me, what the Metroidvania kind of encapsulates is like, okay, you're throwing a character in a world that they have no idea about, right? It's always alien to them, or they kind of know it, but they don't. There's something that makes them feel like, I've never seen this place before. I have to discover, elements, all the tools and elements that are there to kind of help you, conquer this space are there. You just have to crack it in your own time, or in your own sort of way of figuring it out, right? It's almost like a giant puzzle to a degree. Um, and to me, that's exactly what grief is like. No matter what you read, or whatever you kind of sort of are told about it. When you're thrown into it, it's new, it's different, it's always going to be something that you can never ever really truly prepare for, and it gives you all the tools in order to kind of get used to it. You're going to feel sad, you're going to feel angry, you're going to feel happy, and you're going to feel some form of relief, and it's going to come at you at waves that you don't necessarily know about, but you're discovering it the longer you stay in it. And I think this is the thing about Metroidvanias, right? It's like, the longer you stay in a world, or in the world of it all, the more used to it you get. The more it becomes, rather than this alien territory, you're kind of like, I kind of got the idea of it all. And I remember having that feeling when playing or in the Blind Forest. It was a
mhm.
feeling of like, man, this is terrifying, this is scary, this is brutal. And then slowly, after time and over time, you begin getting used to it, and you get the idea of it. You understand like how to move around in it. Even movement. Like, I think like something that I've, was really kind of key on, or you can explore with different games, is like, no jump or movement are the same. It's its own language. And I
Right.
think like, something that I remember with the team and talking to the team about when it comes to the design of our game was like, you know what is our jump? It can't be similar to Ori, but it can't be, it can't be like Dead Cells, or it's what is it? It's got to feel
Mhm.
like the characters jump. And I think like that's also part and parcel of the language of cracking what this Metroidvania element is. And I think like that's why it just very quickly naturally set into what the genre is at the beginning, and we kind of played and built from it from there.
I remember the first time I read your sort of first interview. I think it was 20 minutes after the game was announced at the Game Awards. I read an
Mm,
interview that you gave where you said something to that effect about it being a sort of encapsulation of what grief is and all that stuff.
mm,
I read that and I tweeted immediately like, "This guy gets it. He fully understands what it is. He understands what he's trying to put together. Like, there's a vision there," and I
mm,
appreciate that. I think it's interesting what you say about the more you play it, the more you sort of immerse yourself in it, the more it gets.
mm.
It's almost like learning a language in a way where it's like you start
Yeah,
to notice patterns. You start to notice like you walk past something that's completely alien to you the first time. You come back after 10 hours. You're like,
you
oh,
know it.
that's one of those things.
Yeah.
There's something probably something hidden here, and like the world grows with you as you play. And
Mm,
I think that's
Man,
great.
and it's funny because like, I read that interview too, right? And I heard you put it that way, but to hear you both talking about it, hearing two passionate Metroidvania people talk about it that way, like, what an excellent metaphor for grief, right?
Mm,
it really is.
mm,
That's so clever.
Honestly, and I think that's the truth of the matter. And I remember like being asked like, "Oh, why didn't you, naturally as an actor, you think, oh, you'd make it into a film, or you'd make it into a TV show, right?" But to me, it's like, no, you've got to respect the story and the medium. And I think like that's why I can never see Zhao being a TV show or a film,
mhm.
because it had to work in the way of a game, and that's the medium it needed to be. And I think like that's, you have to kind of, especially when it's what I've realized anyway, when it's come to design and elements of making these sort of experiences, you have to really, it's a mixture of respecting the story, respecting the medium, but also really respecting the detail and the element of it all, the genre, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's sort of why I lent into it all.
I'd love to pull on a thread you just laid out there, because I was interested about that, because you joked when we jumped on, right, that you took a big risk and kind of inundated yourself
Mm,
in games as a director and starting a new studio, and
mm.
that this was something that, and I remember you said in at the Game Awards that it was something that you wanted to feel that was both true to you and to him. I'm
Yeah.
interested in what about the story made you feel so strongly that it needed to be told through games specifically?
Yeah, I think it was a mixture of, again, as I say, like my dad introducing me to games and bringing
Yeah,
me into games and wanting to honor that. I think also my love for games as well. And I even as an actor, like I always say, like I actually got into acting through games because
right.
whenever I played games, I was going through the journey of these characters and I was in their feet, in their shoes essentially, and I wanted to live their experiences in a way,
Mhm.
and I think that's kind of, to me that was like, oh great, then if I can be an actor and kind of do this as a job, that'll be fantastic. So that was like kind of, my way in, and it just honestly, it just made sense. And it's one of those ones where, my father passed away 10 years ago, and I've been sort of trying to figure out, like, how do I communicate this feeling? Because again, being an
Yeah,
artist, you want to try and express it in a way
Yep.
that kind of makes
absolutely.
people feel it. And so, and I was thinking, maybe do I write something? Maybe do I, like, what do I do? And honestly, I was in South Africa at the time filming Raised by Wolves, and it just clicked. It really just clicked. It was just like, it has to be a game. And that was 4 years ago.
That's interesting what you just said there about, sort of you being in South Africa and sort of it clicking for you and you coming up with that. The game story is sort of inspired by Bantu tales, right? And
Mm,
it's a mythology that a lot of people, especially sort of in the West, aren't going to be as familiar with as they are,
mm.
let's say, like Greek mythology or Egyptian mythology or anything like that.
Yeah.
How much of that is sort of inspired by, stories that you heard growing up? How much of that is inspired by stuff that you would have seen where you were in South Africa? And how much of that is sort of new that you've created based on that instead of it just being a retelling?
Yeah, no, it's honestly, it comes from the fact that I grew up with these stories, man. Like, my dad would tell me, so my grandfather was an nganga, which is essentially like a traditional healer. And my
Okay.
dad would tell me all these stories about, him talking to spirits and whatnot and everything. And I used to terrify me as a kid, but then also at the same time, I'd be like, oh, okay, this is interesting. So I kind of grew up with this stuff. I grew up with those stories. And even like my uncles and they would share kind of really cool stories too. When I was working in South Africa as well, I was very much exposed to the different cultures, the languages, the people there as well, and kind of learning this whole new world that was totally untapped. But like it's funny because again, I sort of I sort of fell into the idea of doing it as a Bantu myth, or like doing it in with the Bantu tales kind of second, after the fact. I decided that it had to be a story about grief, and it had to be
Mhm.
it had to be a Metroidvania. And like it was almost like, and I know I say this all the time, but it could have been anything. It could have been a Greek story. It could have been like, or based in Greek myth, or based in Norse myth. But
Mhm.
I think just because of the fact that it's just from my perspective and from what I've kind of experienced, I was like, and also, I mean, the Bantu gods are, they're wild, man. Like, they are like, there's a lot to kind of take from there. So like it just made sense to really pull from it from that space and really play in that space. And I always say, like, I'm aware that not many people will know about Bantu myths and
Mhm.
tales and legends, and but my job isn't necessarily really to educate people and teach them about it. It's more in sense to kind of celebrate it and inspire people on it. I
Sure.
always say, like, if I can pull you from the game once you've turned it off, and you go and Google what an impundalu is, and you go down a wiki wormhole
Yeah,
of that, I've done my job. You know what I mean? Like
absolutely.
that's the aim.
I think it's interesting because after the game's initial review, right? Like Max was saying how he really responded to the Metroidvania
Mm,
side of it, and he and I both were like, "Oh, we're so excited about this." And I was coming at it more from the I also have a very close relationship with my father,
mm,
and in general, like, you said something earlier about how through playing games that kind of developed that interest in acting because you liked kind of being
mm,
able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And to me, that's like one of the most interesting things about games is that, like, because it's interactive, like, it's kind of the closest you can get to having an experience that's
oh,
different from your
totally.
own. And right. And it's such a powerful tool for like learning and extending empathy and things like that. And
Mm,
I saw this and was like, oh my gosh, like I love the idea of getting to have an inroad into this mythology that I'm not familiar with through a
mhm,
game that I'm just interested in because of its, the base humanity of it, right? Like that, like
mhm,
everybody loses somebody. We all love and lose people. And,
mhm.
and I think it's cool that I feel like through making the story more specific, it kind of makes it more universal, you know?
Yeah,
Mhm.
and that's the thing, and I think like there's always again it's a very kind of typical acting sort of trait where the more specific you are as an actor or as the character that you're playing, the more relatable it becomes.
Yeah.
Weirdly, it's that whole thing, and I think like that's something that I really wanted to focus on with this game as well. Like I really kind of wanted to lean into the story, lean into that as well. And look, you're right, man. Like games are an incredibly powerful medium. It's why, I feel, gamers are incredibly passionate about it. You're not spending like an hour or two on TV watching something passively, or, I'd say, the closest element to it is reading a book to a degree. But, reading a book, you're also having to do a lot of the work of imagining what the world is like and how the characters sound and
Like you
everything. But
control the pace too, right? Like
well,
you're
this
the
is
one
it,
that
right?
turns the
Yeah.
page, you know?
This is it.
Turning the
So this is the
pages.
thing. So like, yeah. So I feel like with games, it asks and demands that time. You're spending like, you know, some people over 100 hours on these in these worlds and in these shoes, and that's a lot. If you think about like the finite time that we actually do have on this earth, like it's really powerful. So I think like as a medium, it's a technical art, and like to me, I really kind of wanted to lean into that.
So while we're talking about, I guess, some of the creation element, like I'm interested in, I guess, how like getting the story on paper came to be. Because something I was struck by when we were playing the demo, right, was like, you're only playing like the opening bits of the game, but I
Yeah.
think you get a really good taste of kind of what the emotional stakes are for Zhao, right?
Mm,
And kind of I guess it's not the first conversation he has with death, but it's
mm.
like I think it's around the time, where there's that incident with the child in the bridge that gets
Yeah.
introduced, right? And it's like this very, very like emotionally charged moment, right? And
Yeah.
I found the script to be really, really strong in that moment.
Mm,
And I'm interested in, I guess, what that process was like for you, right? Like as someone who's a
yeah.
first time game dev and you are
Yeah.
the director and you are like, the kind of the person who has the vision for the
Yeah.
story, not just the story, but also the artistic
Yeah.
execution and all that. Like, how involved in the script were you, and or
Oh,
were you
like
a more overseeing kind of role?
no, man. So so look, okay. So I've read a lot of scripts, right?
Mhm.
Read a lot of scripts as an actor. Written scripts, no. So the thing is, and it's a very different skill.
Yeah, absolutely.
But my best mate from school, he's learned how to script write. He's a script writer,
Mhm.
and and he grew up with my dad. My dad would take me and him to school literally every day. Like it would always he'd pick us up. Like it was that kind of relationship. So and I remember ages when I was growing up, I remember being like, "Look, we're gonna work together. Like, we're gonna do something together. We're gonna, make something work together, right?" And we did, and so it was me and him essentially writing this whole story,
That's
and
awesome.
literally just pulling from everything that we can muster. But we had no idea what it meant to write for a game. Like he had never used Unreal before.
Yeah.
I've never still not really used Unreal before. So like, we were very much coming at it blind. But the beauty of it all was, we had an idea of what we wanted to tell, the story that we wanted to tell. So even that moment of the bridge, right? The way that we kind of spoke about it or approached it was like, okay, let's build up with Zhao basically being like this very kind of strong-headed kid. He's got an idea, he's got this mention, this is what he's going to do, this is where he's going to go. He's talking to Death and he's being like, look, I can do this. This is me proving myself to you. I can do this. And then suddenly Death's like, yeah, sure, okay, I believe you. Let's do this then. And Zhao's like, great. And then suddenly at that bridge, he meets an obstacle, and that's the click. And I think, like, in my head, it's like something so small can trigger anything. You
Mm-hmm.
don't know where it comes from or where it's laced from, but you have to find a way of controlling that. And that's, again, something that I remember experiencing. Even I was, there was a moment I remember being in the train, and there was, there was a man and a kid in front of me, a young boy, and I think the man just literally just put his hand on the kid's head or something, and it just triggered me, and it just made
Mm-hmm.
me,
Yeah.
I just started crying. And I remember thinking, and it was so small, like, you see it every day, and I
The
think,
straw
like,
that broke
that
the camel's
was,
back.
well, this is it. And and that moment was like, oh my God. And it's like, trying to capture those moments. And me and my mate would literally just be talking about, where are these moments?
Mm-hmm.
Where are these moments that we can kind of lace them in? That was essentially one of those moments. But again, it's like that whole thing of, like, we're then having to like think, okay, if it's a film, you can kind of just play the dialogue as you go along. But how do you choose when you go into the 2D dialogue portraits, for example, or,
Yeah.
like, the moments of when you're going on your journey? How do you make sure that the technical elements of it all were really, like, the bits where we were just like, I don't know, I'll just make it work. But, like, it was very much like, really, truly, the story was something that I really leaned in with my mate, in regards to, like, the design stuff and elements of that, like the two masks and everything. Like, yeah, I had an input onto it and a feel and an idea of what I wanted to push for. But a lot of that then also came down to trusting my team and knowing that my
Mm-hmm.
team also are experts in what they do and what they want to bring and what they want to build. And so we play with it. And as long as, we're all working together and building the experience that I kind of, that we all want to kind of communicate, that's important.
That's something I wanted to ask you actually. That this is a brand new studio. It's clearly not a one-man band. Let's say that it's you and your best mate from school have had this
Mm.
experience. You're doing this together. How do you then go about finding the right team of other people? The rest of the marketers, the developers, the artists. How do you find people to tell what is very personal story that
Yeah,
you two know so well? How do
yeah.
you find these strangers, these new people, to
Yeah,
accurately portray that?
I think that's particularly interesting with the context of knowing that the first collaborator is somebody who knew your dad. So, like, that totally
Mhm.
Yeah,
makes sense to bring him in, right? But it's like, how do you
yeah.
then bring more people into this extremely personal
Yeah.
thing and inundate them in a way that feels authentic?
I think you just got to be vulnerable and open with people. Like, I think, as I said, like, I joke about saying, like, I slid into so many people's DMs and, into LinkedIn, like, on Twitter, on, like, yeah, ArtStation, everywhere, right? And ask, and basically the way I'd open it is be like, hey, my name's Abu. I'm an actor. You might know me from Assassin's Creed Origins. Um, but look, that's not about what I want to talk about. I want to talk about making this game. This is the game. It's about grief in the space and African mythology. Can you help me? And
That's a
it's like,
hard pitch.
I know, it's like, it's crazy. And some people think that I'm fake. Like, they thought I was
Mhm.
fake for a long time, and they generally were like, you're just scamming me for something. But, like, it was, or they would put me towards someone else. I remember sending at least 300, 500 odd emails, like,
Man.
a day, to a degree, like, of just trying to figure out who to talk to, what information to gain. And you realize that it's an art form. Everyone's got their own opinion of how it should
Mhm.
be made.
Totally.
And, I think for me, it was one of those ones where I came in very ignorant, and I kind of am happy I did, because if I knew how hard it is to make a game and the
Yeah.
actual levels that you have to go through, oh my God.
It's easy to have an
It's like,
idea, right? Hideo Kojima
yeah,
walks in a room, says just a few verbs and proper nouns, and people just go, "Yeah, we'll work with that." Whereas you really can't do that. You
no,
haven't had all those
not
years
at
of
all.
experience of doing it.
Not at all. And you've got to earn the trust of not only the people that you're working with, but, then the next phase is earning the trust of the people that you're going to be giving the game to. So
Mhm.
it's like, it's all just trust building. So yeah, it was really, finding the team was one of those ones where it was pulling from a lot of people that I've known in the past, pulling from a lot of things that I see online. But truly, again, it's this kind of thing of, like, as long as the vision and the idea is honest and truthful, and, it leans into this idea of grief and wanting to tell that, Like that's kind of the driving force and momentum of this. And look, don't get me wrong, like, you know, it's funny, like starting is basically like a startup. Like this game was very much, it was about building the team. It was about finding how we work together, what works with one another, like our pipelines and all this sort of jazz. But at the end of the day, we all had a goal that we wanted to deliver a powerful, passionate experience that explores grief in a universal way.
Mhm.
I want to ask a question there too, because I think something I'm interested there is like it's interesting to me to think that you went through that formative experience of like entering
Mm.
this industry and learning all those things, and that the first project is one that's this ambitious, you
Oh
know, and
yeah,
that
massive.
it's
Yeah.
not just a really personal story or you know an ambitious genre in Metroidvania, but also
Mm.
like the game is beautiful, it has a great soundtrack, like there's so much thought put into the production of it. Was there ever a
Yeah.
point as you were kind of getting on this journey where you were like, maybe this should be the second game? Like maybe we should do
Mhm.
something smaller to get our feet wet or get
Yeah,
people
all the
aware of
time.
Make
us or
Pong first. Just
I
make
yeah,
know.
right,
Pong
right.
and then
Right,
Like,
you don't
then
start with
Tales of
Mario, right?
Kenzera.
I know, man. No, honestly, yeah. I mean, like, there multiple times where I've literally come out of it and thought, man, this is hard. Like, this is, you know, and the scope has changed dramatically from when we pitched it to EA to what it is now. Like, it's definitely changed. But again, it's funny, the process of making a game is so hard, man. And like, I honestly put it down to the fact that because it is something so personal and something so kind of, you know, to my heart, been the driving force as to why we kind of got it through to the end, you know, through
Yeah.
to the finished product, right? So yeah, it was there were many moments of thinking, yeah, this is a lot, man. This is a lot. This is a lot. But then at the same time, it's like, no, it's going to be worth it. It's going to be worth it. And you kind of think of like, right, what limitations, what restrictions can I put to myself on this thing in order to kind of bring the best element of what it is going to be, you know? And that's kind of where we kind of you know, we're leaning into like any limitation that we're given was going to be something that could essentially propel the genre in the game to another level. Also, you know, I think a lot of it comes down to also the fact that like we kind of come with this mantra, or I come with this mantra anyway, of like, if you know, if this is the only chance I get to make a game, like the only game I ever
Yeah.
make, be it or whatever, it's got to be something that we all feel proud of and that we all
Mhm.
feel like we've done well. Like we don't want to feel like we've shortchanged ourselves by just trying something safe. Like let's be bold, let's be different, let's, you know, go crazy with it. And I think that's, you know, that's what led us to go with where we wanted to go with.
I
So
think it's working really well, I think.
yeah,
Thank
definitely.
you.
I mean, I from, you know, what we've
Thank you.
experienced of it already, there's already been things we've found, that we were able to connect with. So
Mhm.
I'm very interested to see, to follow that journey through.
Thank
And
you.
something I wanted to ask you there that I think is interesting too is like, and I don't know, I think this is something that I'm prepared to for this to be an ignorant question because I think from the outside, right, like everybody's an overnight success, and you know it's easy
Yeah.
to project narratives onto people, right? But you know, from the outside looking in, like I feel like you know over the last couple years, right, like you know, you just mentioned earlier, right, this idea kind of came to together and finally clicked into place while you're working on Raised by Wolves.
Mm.
And you know, like you've had a few other like more high profile projects in the last couple years. And is that something that you're thinking about it all now as you kind of are getting closer to this game being ready to be out in the world? Is like are you at all is there a conversation going on in your head about like juggling these two different careers or you know
Yeah, you know what? It's funny. Like I think for me, I've sort of gone into this space of like, you know, I've always driven, even when it comes to acting, just enjoying the power of being able to tell a story, right? Be it
Yeah.
through playing a character or be it through making a game. So and it's one of those ones where it's I think I'm sort of seeing it as all one thing. You know, I think like, you know, even like the work that I'm doing now on House of the Dragon, like it's all part and parcel of jumping into these big worlds and learning about what it means to kind of work in these huge worlds to then
yeah.
share it and be like, oh, I wonder if I could build something, you know, be inspired by this to build something kind of cool and unique and different in the same sort of vein. So like it's, yeah, I'd say like as that, they're all coming at the same time in a way, like, I'd
Yeah.
say like Raised by Wolves and House of the Dragon, that's coming up. This game is, also about to launch. Like they're all climbing together, but it's all with the same intention of telling really cool stories. And I think
Yeah.
like that's sort of why I can juggle it. Plus, also, I've got an amazing team with me, man. Like,
Mhm.
the team over at Surgeon are incredible at just sort of, you know, being able to sort of, I can tell them a crazy idea and they just run with it, right? And that's sort of what's really cool is like we all trust each other to know that we're doing the right things with one another. So yeah, it's funny. Like it is definitely a juggling act, right? And also now having a baby, it's like,
Yeah.
it's like also that's also another element of it all as a whole. But at the same time, it's also really enriching and really kind of fueling because you're like, yeah, I'm doing this because and it's all working because it's coming from a place of passion, man.
Yeah.
I bet you're shattered as well.
Oh, totally. I don't sleep. But like, but it's again, it's just I just love what I'm doing, man. I love it.
Mhm. I wanted to ask before we sort of because I would like to talk more about the game, but just on the studio. So, you know, you've put the team together, you've managed to convince all of these people that you're not a lunatic, you've got this idea, you're serious about it, you're not just an ideas man, right? You pitch this game around to all sorts of studios and you find your home with EA, right?
Mm,
It's rare to see these kind of sort of auteur-driven projects coming from AAA studios nowadays. So what is
mm.
it was it about EA, other than them just saying yes and giving you a load of money, that makes them a good partner for Surgeon? But and also like what kind of input are they having over the game's direction and on the game as a whole?
They were the only people I pitched to.
Oh, really?
I
Wow.
Oh,
I
right,
had
okay.
I
Interesting.
have again, I had no idea who to pitch to. I didn't even know you had to pitch to anyone, to be honest. I genuinely, again, when I tell you I came into this like whole thing ignorant, I really did.
Mhm.
Like it was, driven by this idea of wanting to make something and just going like full hog with this idea of like this is what's going to happen. And I remember a good friend of mine, who actually, funnily enough, interviewed me in a podcast setting, decided to jump into games, and he was working at EA at the time. And he was like, "Dude, have you got like a deck or anything?" Because I told him I wanted to make this game, and I was like, "What's a deck? Like, I don't know. What do you mean? Like a deck of cards? Like Yu-Gi-Oh cards? What are you chatting about, man?" Like, and he was like, "No, like a deck that kind of, just give me like a one pager that encompasses your vision of what this game of what you want to make." And I did it, and I was like, "Okay, here you go." And he was like, "Great, I'm going to send that to EA." And he was, working at EA, and I was like, "What are you doing? Sending it to Like, don't EA like make FIFA? Like, why? Why are they going to help me on this?" Anyway, it was the originals program essentially that kind of
Yeah.
opened the door to this idea of taking, these bold choices, or these kind of making these bold choices in regards to making these cool games. And that's essentially what ends up happening. And it's a small division, right? It's not actually part of that massive EA arm. Like, it may look big, but that's because it's EA, right?
Mhm.
But the
We've seen
actual
a few
originals,
games from
mm,
EA. We've seen sort of It Takes Two, Wild Hearts. We've seen sort of
yeah.
Feast. A lot of these smaller games that are fantastic games that
Unraveled.
are coming
Mm,
from this. Yeah.
mm. Yeah, and I think like that's the thing. It's like they're willing to take risks and willing to kind of be a bit bold in that regard, and they're willing to make mistakes. And I think like that's why it kind of worked because I knew, and I think they knew as well, that I was going to make a ton of mistakes when it comes to making this game. Be it either with scope, be it with with timing, be it with
Mhm.
and they were the security and safety net of EA. They allowed you to make mistakes, which is funnily, again, and I know they rib me for this all the time, but it's the beauty of what was great about working with Ridley Scott was like he allowed you to explore and make mistakes because it's all a process of art and like it's all about finding the art. And I think like that's why it worked with them.
It's funny because our other co-host Steve, who wasn't able to join us today, he and I are both big fans of Jason Schreier, and his book Blood, Sweat, and Pixels is about like how hard it is that any game gets made.
Mm,
I believe he says that it's a miracle that any video game gets made, right?
really,
And
truly is.
it's wild to hear you say that when you think about how much of making a game is finding the fun, right? It's like not only
Yeah.
just having a good idea, but then like you said, like does the jump feel good? And like
Yeah.
that's so ineffable, right? Like it doesn't feel good until it does. And it's
Yeah.
not like did this line of dialogue hit you? Is this beautiful art? Is this a good piece of music? It's so much more it's about feel, and
Yeah.
About
that's
feel, yeah, it's about these things that you cannot have any control over.
yeah,
Like,
you just got
honestly,
to hope it comes
you
together,
just gotta hope it works at the end of the day, and it's like, and it's scary because you are genuinely diving into this thinking, "Is this gonna work?" It works in my head, I don't know if it works
Mhm.
really practically, and you have to be able to then adapt and grow with that, and that's essentially what we ended up doing with Zao.
So
The the miracle there of you saying, the whole point of does the jump feel good? That's one of like 10 buttons. There's 9 other buttons
Yep,
there that you've got to also make feel
literally,
good and
man.
combinations of them.
Literally,
And
man.
and the two
Like
different
combat.
masks, it's like that's two
Oh
oh,
my
different
god.
that's two
Well,
different play styles,
this is it, man. So like it was, that's part of the challenge. And you don't
mhm.
necessarily, and again, I didn't realize that until we kind of dived into it, but like that is all part of the challenge of what it means to make a game. And then you've got the challenge of, selling the game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
You're
yeah,
putting in
there's
work, man, as well. Like I've seen you
oh
everywhere. You're
the
you're
thing
doing
is
it.
again, but it's part of the love for it and the enjoyment
Mhm.
of it. And I think like it's one of those ones which I do want to scream about and shout about because it's I care about it, in the same way that it's the creation of this game has seen me, have a kid, man. Do you know what I mean? Like that's
yeah.
like kind of the reality of the whole aspect of it all. So yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about that because, obviously, like this is a story about your relationship to your father, and I'm
Yeah.
interested in like you having a child during its development. From everyone I've spoken to that I'm close with that has a child, right? I think
Mm,
most people have a kind of there's before and there's after that. Like,
mhm.
how has that influenced your relationship to the story, and I
I mean,
guess like
it's
what you hope for people to take away from it?
yeah, it's evolved, man. It's really evolved. I think having had a child, it's really sort of made it's made a lot of things. It's brought the importance to a lot of things that I thought were important, not. Like the idea of being successful or the idea of trying to, please everyone. Like it's brought home this idea that actually you can't please everyone and you can't control success. All you can control is how you feel about what you put out. And I think that's something that I really wanted to, that's the thing that that having a daughter has really sort of made me realize it's like actually truly you're the most important thing in my life. And as long as you're happy and as long as you're okay and I can only do the best I can as a parent, that's the only thing I can do. And what's made me, and that's sort of reflected in regards to like how my father would have treated me and how he would have seen me. Do you know what I mean? And sort of like the idea that truly, was he afraid? It brought up these questions of like, was he afraid to go? Was he afraid of death? And these are elements as well that kind of found themselves into the game, and I think
Yeah.
like that is like something that I really, you know, it opened up a hell of a lot and influenced a hell of a lot on that front.
I'm going off the cuff here. I'm going off script, right? It's 30 years in the future. Your daughter's your age, right?
Yeah.
She's looking back on her childhood, her upbringing. You know, what are the games that she's gonna think of, or what are the games that you want her to think of as my dad showed me this from his childhood when I was growing up? Like, what are the games
Yeah,
that
like the
you've
way that you
played?
brought up you and your dad would play Sonic, like,
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
what's
not
that?
games
What's
that you
that?
played as a child necessarily, but like games that from here until now. I know you've mentioned Hades a few times. I'll get to that in a little bit. But like, what are the
Yeah.
games that you want her to experience? When she's growing up, that she's gonna like, yeah, dad showed me that.
I
I'd
know you
say,
said
yeah.
Kingdom Hearts, Gary's Mod,
Yeah.
Golden Sun, like,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
are some
I
other
would say, yeah, I would say essentially like I think definitely one of those is definitely Kingdom Hearts to kind of
Hmm.
to throw a spanner in the works of her being like, "What? You like this? I don't understand it."
Gotta
Dad, I
give it
don't
to her really
understand.
young so that she
You know
gets
what I
into,
mean?
like, the insane, giant sprawling narratives like
Yeah.
that.
Exactly, exactly. I would also say, another great sort of game I'd say is the Tears of the Kingdom sort of,
Yep.
or,
Yeah.
the Breath of the Wild. Those that, that's something that I do definitely want her to experience and enjoy and play. Um, Pokemon, man, you can't go wrong with
Oh,
Pokemon.
yeah.
And I wanna go
There
classic.
we
I wanna
go.
go like red. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
give
red and
yeah.
blue, like
Yeah, there we go.
not the new stuff. Like I don't want the new stuff. I think the new stuff is great, but like for me, it's all about like this is what I grew up on. You know what I mean? Like this
Yeah.
is the kind of stuff. And I think that's the thing as well. I'd like her to play some classics just to kind of be like, oh, okay, this is what dad played when he was learning, right? In a
Yeah.
way. So yeah, I'd say like I'd give her everything, even when it comes to fighting games, give her the, the Dragon Ball Z games, the Tekken games, even elements of Jack and Daxter, those kind of
Oh,
like, good old
yeah.
classic platformers,
I was gonna say that when I was playing the demo and, you're swapping between 2 masks and there's sort of a lot of, the combat really reminded me of those sort of like PS2 era platformers, not to
Right.
slight the game saying it looks like a
No,
PS2
not
game,
at
like it
all. But
feels like it's got that feeling of
it's got that
running,
vibe to it, right?
jumping. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely,
Yeah, I
because
love
it's
that.
again, it's nostalgic. It's playing into
Mhm,
that idea of like, this is what I grew up on. This is the kind of stuff that comes to mind. This is
mhm.
what I want to kind of, to play. People who play it who haven't played those games before are going to be like, oh, this is really, fun kind of action, adventure game. But the people who have kind of played it, played those games in the past and kind of grew up in the same sort of ilk of my era, they're going to be like, oh, there is a vibe here that feels really
Yeah.
Yeah.
kind of old and nostalgic, and that was planned. That was part of the story of it all.
I think a lot of Metroidvania games have that element of like it's taking these big ideas, it's taking these sort of like 3D sort of things and then making them 2D and sort of, you know,
Mm,
making these things, there's a lot of elements in there that are, you know, AAA big game ideas that you're playing on a 2D space. I think the genre is very, very good for that.
mm.
Oh,
What
actually,
other
I
Oh,
wanna pull in a question here from
go.
Andrew Valentine, one of our supporters, who said, "Are there any specific gameplay influences on Tales of Kenzera Zao? And do you have any picks for underrated or overrated Metroidvania?" So I guess it's
Interesting.
specifically on Metroidvanias that influence the game's development.
I would say I'd say, Blind Forest and Will o' the Wisps did definitely play like
Fantastic.
a big influence in regards to that kind of stuff, especially Will o' the Wisps combat and how they played with the fluidity of it all. I think
Mhm.
that
Yeah,
was really cool.
Light and heavy
Um,
attacks and stuff really play into that game in
yeah,
the
it's
same way that it does
really
in
kind of,
WoW.
and it felt artistic as well, which is something that
Mhm.
was really awesome. I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, Dead Cells doesn't really count as a
I would say it
Metroidvania, but
counts. I
oh
could spend
yeah,
about half an hour talking about it, but it
no,
does
yeah,
count, I'd say.
yeah. I would say that was definitely an influence as well.
Mhm.
That feeling of actually completing a run for the first time was that it's that classic old feeling of completing something, and I think
Yeah,
that was something that we really wanted to capture with Zao. I would say, kind of going a bit off kilter, Devil May Cry played a really big influence in regards to the
great,
combat
yeah.
and juggling and playing with that kind of, madness, but actually being able to control that madness as a whole.
Mhm.
I can see
Um,
that with, like, the way that, you can kinda, like, chain attacks between the 2
yeah,
different mask styles. Like, that was
yeah,
something I felt like in the first kinda, like, mini boss fight of, like, "Oh, okay. I
yeah,
understand now how I'm supposed to use long range, and then while that's building back up, I can go do," and, like, how they
yeah.
feed into each other.
Like nothing pleases me more than, throwing an enemy in the air, switching to the blue mask, and then being able to juggle them in the air. Like that feels so
Totally.
good.
When we're done recording, I'll suggest a game to you. You talked about Kingdom Hearts, you talked about Devil May Cry. There's a Metroidvania you might like that does
For
in that,
sure.
but I can't remember the name, so I'll get it off. I'll get it
For
off.
I was
sure.
like, "Well, you're not gonna
Yeah.
say the game's name on
Name
the
I
air?"
now.
can't remember the name of the game. I say it came out last year
I gotta
or
look
the
it
year
up.
before. I don't know. Um, yeah, and what about sort of overrated, underrated Metroidvanias? What do
Yeah, that's
you
the thing. I don't know. I'd say like I mean, from again, it's one of those ones where, put it this way, right? I remember playing Hollow Knight. I
Mhm.
tried to get into Hollow Knight 3 or 4 times. I couldn't do it. And then after a while, I just had to force myself into it. And then I fell in love with it.
Yeah, it
So
clicks.
that turned from an overrated one into like an actual, like, oh, actually, no, this needs every accolade it needs.
Yeah, it deserves
Um,
its flowers,
and
yeah.
that kind of thing. I'd say, Control technically is a really, really underrated sort of Metroidvania. I feel like it's a great
Fantastic.
game and people love the game, but it's like I think it's like a fantastic
Really
Metroidvania.
is. It's so I think that's
Um,
really underrated that
yeah,
people
really
maybe
underrated.
don't see it for what it is, they see it for what they think it is or what it looks like, but
Yeah,
if you really
man.
take the time to sort of immerse yourself in it and sort of like let it take you over, it's just yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic game.
And look, the new Prince of Persia is like that deserves a shout out because that
Yep.
is like
I was gonna
that's
bring that up as
clean.
well.
That is clean. What
It
a clean game.
I was gonna bring it up earlier that, like, it's you spend all these years with indie Metrovanias coming out, the genre is, it's sort of dropped out of the big AAA side and start moving up in the indie side, and then in the same year, you get EA and Ubisoft both putting out these sort of top tier looking Metrovanias. It's, like,
Mm,
unprecedented. It makes me feel like, either, like, fantastic, we're gonna get more of these, or, uh-oh, we're gonna start getting flooded with a load more clones of these sorts of games, the same way we did Hollow Knight from a couple of years ago. Um I wanted to quickly touch on something because I know we're probably running out of time here. Um, there was an interview you did a couple of weeks ago with Xbox On. You mentioned
mm,
Hades a few times when you were talking about Kalunga as a character.
mhm,
Now, Hades is another character that sort of spends a lot of time exploring the relationship between a character and his father. Now, that game came out in 2020. Your father died in 2013, 14.
Yeah.
How did that game speak to you when you played it, sort of 7 years removed from the death of your own father? Like, how did that sit with you? How did that stick with you? How did that bring up any feelings? But also, how did that then influence Tales of Kenzera, if it did at all?
Yeah, it's one of those ones where I think actually the game, it's such a beautiful game, so
Mhm.
good. It
One
just
of my
you
favorites.
lose time in it without even knowing you lose time.
Mhm.
It was I think there was a it made me realize or kind of make me see look allowed me to see a phase of a relationship with a son and a father where the son is trying to grow up and be an adult of his own ilk and of making his own choice, which I never had, with which I didn't really actually, yeah, I wouldn't have experience with my father because he passed away before I graduated from drama school, before I was technically an adult out of full-time education to a degree.
Mhm.
So there was that element of it that really sort of stuck with me. I was almost really, playing into again this fantasy of like, I wonder what my relationship with my father would be after the fact, after I've done all this acting stuff and everything, and asking for his advice or whatever, or would he have told me to do something different, job wise or whatever? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I think there was that element of it that I think really kind of resonated with me. And I think with Zhao, it just I think the thing that I loved about it was the sweaty palm combat element of it all, the fighting and striving for a goal to get to the end. I think that was something that I really wanted to emulate and capture when, from Hades into Zhao.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you definitely nail that as well. I think Hades does a very good job of taking the Devil May Cry style stuff and then putting it on its sort of on a top-down element or
Mm.
like, an asymmetric element. Um, yeah, great. I mean, we are sort of coming up to the end of our hour here. Have you got time for a couple more questions, or are we sort of on more of a tight schedule
I've
than?
got one more question because I could hear my daughter
Yeah,
screaming.
go
All
on,
right,
Pete. Go on,
no
Pete.
problem. Yeah, we'll get you back to go do some dad stuff. So I just want to ask this question, I think, which is, and this is actually one that came from one of our supporters, Andrew Valentine again, who said, what is the thing that you hope people take away from the game?
Oof. I think really, truly, it's the idea of that it's okay to not be okay. I think like that to me is what's really key because I think there is always this feeling that you've got to have, you've got to have it all together. That you've got to be totally kind of, corpus mentis, everything's cool, everything's fine. Especially as a man, I think there is this
Mhm.
Yeah,
there is this pressure of being the man of the house or being like the strong one or being the leader. And actually, you know what? Sometimes you might not feel great. Sometimes you might want to, jump into that ice cream. Like, do you know what I mean? Like it's
yeah.
totally cool. And I think like that's something that I really want to I really wanted to push through with this game. Like, yes, you are playing this young hero, this, this kid who's supposed to feel powerful and whatever, but he's still human. And I think that's the thing about us as humans, right? We our emotions range and vary. And I think we're all connected and we all have a lot similar with one another. It's just about realizing that. And I think in playing that, and I think that's something that I really wanted to kind of communicate with this game. So I hope people come out with that really like, actually, you know what? Maybe it's okay to talk about my feelings. Maybe it's okay to kind of feel a bit crap. Or maybe, maybe I need to say something about, how someone else is talking to me. Like, I think that to me is what's really key at it all.
I really appreciate that response, and I think it speaks to what you said earlier about how the game came to be, right? That it's important to be vulnerable with people, and I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of strength in vulnerability. So I appreciate
Yeah.
you being vulnerable with us today, Abu.
Yeah, wow.
Thank you.
Really
No,
great.
thank you.
And thank you so much for
Cool.
joining us. This has been such a great
No, of course.
conversation, and
Yeah, great.
I really hope everybody will go check out the game when it comes out. Again,
No,
could you?
I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the time you guys gave, and I really appreciate just the fact that you these are great questions, really deep, good questions, and it shows that you guys care about the games industry, which is again one of the big reasons as to why I'm doing this, man. It's like it's
Absolutely.
it's it's for this, it's for this kind of conversation, it's for this sort of back and forth. It's inspiring.
Of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Right, well,
feel the same.
we won't take it much of your time then. Well, for the folks at the end, what's your game? Where can they get it, and when's it coming out?
Sure. So the game is Tales of Kenzera Zhao. It's coming out April 23rd, which is so close.
So
Yeah,
close,
less than a month.
Oh
everybody.
Wow.
man, so close. And you can get it on all platforms, including the Steam Deck.
Woo!
That's right. Go wish list it right now, baby.
Yeah, obviously we'll have you back on in the future to talk about the Steam
Definitely.
Deck, everything you want on. I'm holding you to
Definitely.
that. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah,
Thank
we'd
you.
love to
Thanks
have you
for
back on
your
when the
time.
game's out, you know?
For sure. Definitely.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for your time. And everybody, thank you again for tuning in to another episode of the Steam Deck Podcast. Remember, if you want to tune in to all of our other shows, if you want to write in and get your thoughts right on the air, if you want to go above and beyond and show your support, just like our Patreon producers did this week, you can do all that and much, much more by heading over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you will find links to all the places we are all over the web. However you choose to get involved or show your support, we thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Steam Deck Podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Abu. All the way over there has been Max. We'll see you next week.